Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and aloha. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you out to this afternoon's lunch and keynote presentation. At this point, though, we're going to start with a prayer from Chaplain Jim Edwards from U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Sir.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we ask your blessing on all those in attendance at this conference. May this conference be of mutual benefit to industry and the military services from throughout the Indo-Pacific, as together we seek peace through regional security and stability. As participants focus on regional defense issues, may the conference reflect the expanded, broader Indo-Pacific view with participation from those throughout the area, discussing defense policies and challenges and their relevance to both industry and government through a new and fresh lens. This afternoon, we ask that you bless our speaker, Lieutenant General Jacobson, and we ask that you now bless this meal as well. And we pray all this in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain Edwards. We'd like to recognize our supporting partners for this event. Carl Teagan, Senior Vice President, Army and DISA, for Taito Athene. AFCEA is a unique organization, and AFCEA Hawaii has been blessed with many outstanding individuals that, through their exemplary leadership, have allowed it to become a model for other chapters to emulate. At this time, may I ask the current and former presidents of AFCEA Hawaii to rise for recognition. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your meals. I will be returning shortly to introduce the speaker. Hope you're all enjoying your lunch as we talk. At this time, I get a unique opportunity. I get to be the MC that introduces my boss's boss. Lieutenant General Jacobson is the Deputy Commander. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm being asked to ask for a little bit of quiet in the room. Thank you. So as I was saying previously, I have the unique opportunity right now to introduce my boss's boss at Pacific Air Forces. Lieutenant General Jacobson is here to be our keynote speaker. As he comes up, I'll direct you to the AFCEA app, which has his bio, and he will be giving us a keynote followed by a question and answer session. If you have any questions for the General, please direct them to the number that will be on the screen, and he'll answer the questions. Sir, over to you.
Hey, good afternoon. How you doing? So to Susan and Linda, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I mean, when I look at where we were last time, I think you're 4 times the size. So my thanks to you for your leadership to get this back to where it should be in terms of volume and participation. There may be one country in the world that doesn't get it yet, but it's time to move on from COVID. So thanks for expanding this back to what it was. Hey, so let me first start out with the good news in the room is your Air Force turned 75 just a little bit ago. So my public affairs officer doesn't allow me to say that I call it the great divorce of 47, so don't tell Brandon that I said it. But, you know, Billy Mitchell, good friend, a good kid from Wisconsin like me, you know, went to court and lost, trying to get us to be a separate service. So there's a little bit of the Air Force emerging as a separate service. And what I'll tell you is, while we may be 75, I think we're actually 115. That's because our good friends, the Army, actually created the Aeronautical Division inside the Signal Corps, which I think is applicable to this audience, back in 1907. So we actually turned 115 this year. And I think what the Army would also tell us is we're not that old. They're going to turn 319 as a grandparent when the Space Force turns 75 in 2094. They are a grandparent, if you didn't get that joke, right? They gave birth to the Air Force, who has since gave birth to the Space Force. So, Army, congratulations on your first child. Just thinking. Hey, so in 75 years, we've been busy. The world's kept us busy. We've pushed a lot of boundaries. We got Medal of Honor winners from this theater like Bud Day. We got a young man that gave his life on a ridge in Afghanistan named John Chapman. We got barrier breakers that have set the precedence for the Air Force from Esther Blake. And if you don't know who Esther is, I challenge you to use that device in your pocket and learn Esther's story about being the first lady to enlist in the Air Force the minute, day, and hour that she could. And Chappie James, who also broke significant barriers for our Air Force. We also have warriors like Robin Olds, who set the pace for us in this theater. So a pretty good history for our Air Force in the first 75 years. Another thing we did this past month was celebrate, the X-15. We were in hypersonics before it was cool. In 1967, a guy named Pete went 6.4 Mach in an X-15 at about 19 miles above the Earth. I think we might have to get back into the business of hypersonics and remind the world that we used to be the best in it and we can be again. So a little bit of history for our Air Force. But it's also about a history of innovation. And that's kind of one of the things I want to build on today is we have a great history of it in the Indo-Pacific. And I think one of the most salient efforts, one of the most poignant efforts is a guy named George Kenney. And if you don't know who General George Kenney was, he was MacArthur's airman when MacArthur sat ensconced in Australia waiting to get back to the Philippines. And George Kenney had the task to figure out how to deliver air power to deliver MacArthur's strategy. And it wasn't easy, and here's what I know. Kenney was under-resourced and ill-equipped for the task. So I think we've been that way in the Indo-Pacific for as long as at least General Kenney was in command of Far East Air Forces, the father of the Pacific Air Forces. But MacArthur gave Kenney the task to disrupt and destroy the adversary's ships. And the Air Force gave Kenney high-altitude bombing doctrine and airplanes that couldn't really do it. And so Kenney decided that instead of following Air Force doctrine and using the equipment as designed, he threw it to the side. And he said, there's a better way to do this if I'm going to meet my combatant commander's task, and that's to destroy and disrupt shipping. And so he looked at it and he said, I got some fighters that can fly in low, but I have never taught them how to do it, and I don't know what bombs to use, and I don't think I have the right fuses, and I certainly don't have the intelligence network to figure that all out. And so like every good aide de camp, he actually divested his aide de camp and put him in command of a bomber squadron in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. It was just New Guinea at the time. And he gave them the task of teaching his unit how to do what we call skip bombing. That's fly a B-17 or a B-25 at 200 feet towards an enemy ship while being shot at, get close enough to drop your bomb, and just like a rock skipping across the water, if you throw it at the right angle, because the bomb didn't have time to tip down, it actually skipped forward into the side of the ship, where it would then detonate, leaving the ship hopefully as a functional kill, if not a sunken vessel. But it wasn't easy. Their first few attempts on a broken down ship in the harbor at Port Moresby resulted in them fragging themselves when the fuses weren't set at the right amount, not being at the right altitude, and the bomb not skipping the right way. But in the summer of '42, George Kenney's aide, Major Ben, and his squadron focused on this task for 3 months to figure out how to fly the right profile, had to change Air Force tactics, how to fuse the bomb properly and find the right fuse, how to use the right munition in order to puncture the ship, and work all that out together. And oh, by the way, they figured out they needed forward shooting guns, so they ripped out the bombardier and put in forward shooting guns. So they did all this while in combat, while deployed forward. At the same time, Big Air Force, Army Air Force at the time, was trying to figure out how to experiment with this back in America so that they could help them do it. And within 3 months, Kenney and Ben and team had their first successful kill in October of '42, and the Big Air Force still hadn't figured out how to do it yet. So under fire, still flying combat missions, in 3 months, they had their first success in the harbor over in New Britain, which is an island off the coast of New Guinea. By January of that year, 6 months later, the team had perfected the art of skip bombing into enemy ships. By the end of February of '43, we had intelligence to suggest that the Japanese at the time were trying to reinforce folks in the midst of Guadalcanal. And I'll pause there and remind you that the United States has been an ally and partner in the Indo-Pacific, to include the Solomon Islands, for the last 80 years. And this year marks 80 years of the U.S. effort to free the Solomon Islands, and we remain committed to those islands as well as all the islands in Oceania. But in late February of '43, the adversary was taking destroyers and transport ships to resupply those islands. So we had intelligence. We combined that with imagery intelligence from aircraft. We combined that with physical intelligence of this great group called Coast Watchers. And if you've never spent any time understanding what role the Coast Watchers played in this, you might not even have John F. Kennedy as president. You might want to see that his granddaughter, now the ambassador to Australia, gave a few awards out this recently because of the work that the Coast Watchers did to save John F. Kennedy's life. But more importantly, you combined all that data into a picture that allowed us to launch B-25s and B-17s at that flotilla in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. And if you don't know your history, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, the U.S. decimated all the transport ships and 4 destroyers through the use of skip bombing that they had practiced for the last 6 months. So my point to that story is this theater is the theater of innovation. This theater is the theater of innovation and will continue to be so. Kenney proved it with his team under fire, and PACAF and its joint partners will continue to do that moving forward. So the British tried it, they couldn't do it. The Aussies tried it, they couldn't do it. Big Air Force tried it and couldn't get it done, but the airmen in the Pacific Theater while under fire did it in less than 6 months and made it work and made a significant impact on combat in the Pacific Theater in 1943. So that was a pretty good year for the United States Air Force before they were the United States Air Force. But this year has been a pretty good year for us too. For those not following along, we now have 2 F-35 squadrons in Fairbanks, Alaska, to combine with 2 F-22 squadrons in Anchorage, Alaska. And if you add that together, that's 108 5th-gen fighters sitting in one of the most strategic places in the world. You can be 8 hours to Europe or 8 hours to Japan from Alaska just by use of the Great Circle route. You combine that 5th gen power with a new range, an improving range, and I talked to you about this last February when I was here. I still think there's value for everybody in this room that does tech to help us improve how that range functions, because it is a vital national asset for what we practice here in the Pacific. You have sea and you have land that you don't have anywhere else in the continental United States. If you haven't been to Nellis, it's surrounded by air traffic routes, and the weapons of this world are getting so long in range that we're running out of space, and one space that still exists is Alaska. So you combine that range with 4 5th-gen fighter squadrons, and you start to create a great training center of excellence to practice like Kenny did. So as we work to make the threats there more dense and more representative of what we may see in the world, I challenge you to figure out how your companies can assist in making that a reality. So what else have we done? Those F-35s that I talked about showed up this summer in Palau. And they generated through what I told you about before, which is our concept of ACE, which is distributed ops across a variety of locations to make sure that we can generate power, combat power under duress and aggregate it in the air. So oddly enough, multiple F-35 showed up in Palau and generated combat power and flew in a few different exercises for us. But the great part of that was about data. Did you guys see in the article that we linked the F-35 to a Patriot battery and shot the Patriot off that data? We are experimenting every day in theater to sew seams closed and to integrate sensors and shooters in ways that are vital to upholding a free and open Indo-Pacific. So pay attention to every exercise. It's an opportunity for you and the folks that you work for to experiment and integrate in a way that might not necessarily have a program behind it, but it might be able to demonstrate to the Department of Defense that there is a capability out there we're not cognizant of, and if we integrate it into this joint and allied scheme of maneuver, it could change the way we do business. So I would challenge you to see these exercises coming up over the next 2 to 3 years as a way to insert yourself. And you can find Colonel Cloud, who's sitting up front there. And if there's a capability that you think is germane to what we're trying to do, let's figure out how to integrate it into an exercise, get the authorities to operate, and give it a go. We're in the business of experimenting, and I'm in the business of figuring out what works and what can make the joint and allied force better. And if you got the game, then let's figure out how to practice with it. We'll figure out the programmatic stuff later. We also sent those same Alaskan F-22s and F-35s to Japan, and we integrated with both the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, the Kokujeitai, as well as our Korean counterparts. We generated ACE from Japan. We actually figured out we could take a KC-135 that's been with us since 1958 and actually refuel it while the engines are running and decrease the ground time by 2/3. Why? Because I need to find a way to get aircraft in the air as fast as I can. And so we are experimenting and trying to break the mold of a peacetime Air Force that grew up when you could control time and you could control everything about a conflict and give up on the past in terms of the way we're structured and find ways to do it faster and more effectively. And watching those aircraft turn quickly is the business we're in. We also debuted the KC-46 in Japan. But I'll tell you, in some ways, I care about it as a tanker, but I actually care about it more as a combat comm node. It's cool that it gives gas, and we need gas in this theater, but we need to interconnect the Allied and Joint Force. And every aircraft that's airborne that has the ability to move data and overcome beyond line of sight limitations is my new favorite friend, right? And so the key, though, is not everything that we own can connect to everything that we own. Different data links, different viewpoints of what moves where, and so any ship or aircraft that has the opportunity to loiter for long periods of time and move data and not really care what the data is, but get to the data to the folks that need it, that's the business we're in. And so we're experimenting on how to take these aircraft that are there, put capability on it, and experiment with it just moving data left and right to get to the right user, the right customer, the right C2 node to figure out how it works. So again, if you think you have a way to help integrate onto a platform and move data across the theater to overcome beyond line of sight and move data from one entity to another to make sure they have it, I'm in the business of learning from you. We also put B1s in Guam and B2s in Australia and spent a lot of time with our allies and partners flying integrated operations in theater. So we are here, we are often, and we are experimenting across a variety of platforms. You guys hear of a thing called pitch black? It's an exercise in Australia, an air-to-air exercise. 16 nations participated, which sounds cool, right? But the French, the British, and the Germans showed up and flew in it in Australia. 50 aircraft, large force exercise. The Europeans see that the impacts of the Indo-Pacific matter in Europe, and they want to be out here. They want to be out here more often, and we're going to see our European partners integrated in more and more exercises moving forward. I laud my Australian counterparts for bringing 16 nations together in 4th and 5th gen in the middle of another great airspace haven, which is Australia. And showing that we can work regardless of security level, regardless of capability, in a way that demonstrates the profound effects of an allied force in theater. So my great thanks to my Australian teammates who, I know you asked Josh Rudd earlier today, I would tell you that every day the U.S. and Australians grow closer and closer together. I'm going to have a counterpart here in January that's an Australian deputy. If you don't think we're trying to sow the operational level of war together between countries, because it matters in this theater, and it doesn't matter what you bring, it matters that we're interoperable and that we've practiced together and we can move data and command and control. You might only have 18 tools, 4 of which nobody else has, and those 4 need to be integrated in their unique way into this combined effort, both for deterrence, which is job 1, but mostly so that if deterrence fails and folks want to continue to push the bounds of a free and open Indo-Pacific, we're ready to go. We're going to continue to experiment with our allies and partners in every way to include ACE, like I talked about. Every time we conduct an exercise now, there's ACE pieces to it, there's command and control pieces to it, and there's data movement pieces to it. We are experimenting in every exercise for the next 2 years. We've laid it out. We know what we want to do. We just don't know everything that we should be trying. That is the future of how we're going to look at every exercise we do. If you're not experimenting across those 3 things, then we're missing the point. And so like I talked about, Kenny sunk ships with data combined with training, practice, and experimentation. He used SIGINT, photo recon, and coastal watchers to create a data set to explore it. And I'm going to tell you, 80 years later, while everything's changed in this world, in some cases what I just described, nothing's changed, right? And if you look at Secretary Kendall's recent remarks, he's making key investments in cyber, IT, and data to underpin Indo-Pacific posture, practice, and plans. The service is committed to this across the information technology domain. I had talked to Ms. Nossenberger, who's here today from Headquarters Air Force. I'm in the business of buying down risk for my successor's successor. There's a great amount of IT risk in the Indo-Pacific, like it or not, across all services. And we're investing where we can and seeking Air Force help, and Secretary Kendall's all in to improve resilience, to improve bandwidth, and to expand capacity, because it's tough enough out here day to day. If you add 40,000 people in combat on top of that and the adversary gets a vote, we are required to make our successor's job more effective. And the number one way I know is buying down comm debt. The number one thing that my successor's successor is going to ask me is, what did I do to improve the communications infrastructure in this theater where it was PACAF's problem? And that's what Thunder and I and the team are working on with ACC's help, with 16th Air Force's help, with Ms. Nossenberger's help. That is the business we're in, so that we're better today, and more importantly, my successor's better tomorrow. But what else do we need? We need advanced, agile, tactical comms for distributed operations. I need folks distributed in an ACE-like environment to get rapid access to all levels of classification, regardless of what's going on overhead or terrestrial. That's the business of being in denied and distributed environments. We need a resilient multi-pathway network, and I need it to look at subsurface, surface, air, space, and cyber, to combine multi-domain effects. And I actually need it not just for the Joint Force with my teammates sitting here today, but I would say more importantly, it needs to be on-demand integrated at the Allied level. The Allies bring key capabilities, they bring key real estate, they bring key strength and power to a coalition defending the free and open Indo-Pacific. And so boxing them out because of IT is not the way to win in this theater. And so I know that's a challenge, and I know there are different levels, but one of the things we have to do is figure out how to do this quickly across key coalition members. And I actually need it to all be network agnostic. If you only have one pathway, and whatever you're connecting with, it's not going to work. It needs to be able to see low Earth orbit. It needs to see geo. It needs to be able to move with line of sight and beyond line of sight capabilities, so that it's not relying on one pathway, because if it is, it's gone. And so I'm asking you to be multidimensional in how you look at how you connect things. We need artificial intelligence and machine learning for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, for command and control, and for targeting. We do not need to be in the business of thousands of people combing through data to figure out what matters and what doesn't matter. We got to use human power for the key elements of that, and the rest of it needs to be done by computational power. If we need help there. And ultimately, it needs to be available for realistic rehearsal. I talked about Alaska. I talked about the importance of the range up there. But what we do has to be available for us to practice, either in the Central Pacific or in Alaska, so that we can integrate allies and partners and see where the networks and links work and where they don't work, so we have time to find something to fill that gap. So Kenny, Major Bean, and team showed the power of freeing the innovative spirit here in the Indo-Pacific, combined with data to link sensor to shooter in a way that had profound effects on a battle 80 years ago. That's our challenge moving forward. So what I ask for you is think about what the future looks like. Anybody here heard of the Air Tasking Order process, an ATO, an AOC? 30 years of awesomeness, right? From Colonel John Warden, right? And thinking about that campaign to now, we have figured out how to use that whole process for exquisite static targets. And I think as a joint force, we've gotten really good at it. But when I look at that theater and I look at what we may be asked to do, here's what I call the 80-20 business. For the last 30 years, we've been an 80% static, 20% dynamic environment. When I look at that theater and I look at the next 15 years, it's actually going to flip. We're mostly going to be in a dynamic event. 80% of our business will be in dynamic targeting and 20% will be in static targeting. So what does that mean? That means to me the ATO can deliver a team, a combined team, a joint team to the right place to about the right place at probably about the right time, so a tactical C2 platform can bring them to bear on a dynamic target. It could be a ship, like George Kenney figured out. But when that crew takes off, they're going to know what their weapons load is or where they're roughly headed, but they'll have no idea what we're going to technically ask them to do about it. That's going to happen in the spur of the moment because of what I talked about before. The data from a sensor moving through a node, didn't matter the pathway, gets to a C2 platform, or it might go direct to the shooter because that shooter already knows what the combatant commander or the joint task force commander's intent is, and they exercise that intent with an effect. Could be a space effect, could be cyber effect, it could be a weapon, some non-kinetic effect, I don't care. But what the ATO process will be getting folks in the right place at the right time to deal with whatever the challenge is, but they won't know when they take off. Some of them will be hours and hours into their day before they even get a sense of what they're going to go do. That's the environment we're living in, which is why we need the ability for data to move quickly, to move regardless of pathway, to regardless of node, to make sure it gets to the right place. That's our future. So when I look at it, you know, if the Chinese Communist Party continues to take provocative and disturbing actions within this theater to undermine the free and open Indo-Pacific, be that economic coercion, be that political coercion, be that physical coercion, all of what I described to you today may be required because deterrence may fail. I am in the business of deterrence, but I'm in the business of being ready. The joint force and the combined force is in the business of being ready. In order to be ready, we need to get after the data challenges that I talked about today and the network challenges I talked about today. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate your contributions to strengthening the network, the cyber, the IT, the infrastructure we have in the Indo-Pacific. And I'll open the mic up for questions at this time. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Yes, sir. We have several. Thank you for your comments.
In the back.
What is PACAF's and the Air Force's decision-making process for permanent replacement of the retiring F-15CD Eagles from Kadena Air Base in Japan? How will you manage the temporary backfill options of aircraft and partners?
Where's Brandon? I told you it would come, right? Yeah, I got it. No, I fully expected the question, right? So, hey, step one, the movement of F-15Cs out of Kadena has no impact on the U.S. commitment to the U.S.-Japan alliance and our commitment to the Indo-Pacific. I told you earlier we've been here for 80-plus years. The Solomon Islands and Guadalcanal is one example of that. Just because we're changing out aircraft at Kadena doesn't mean we're leaving Kadena. You will see multiple aircraft from around the United States Air Force spend 6 months at a time on a on an Okinawan deployment, right? Demonstrating that the U.S. is still there, and actually in some degree gives us some flexibility, because I think you'll probably see some 5th-gen aircraft show up at Kadena considerably more regularly, which gives us an opportunity to further our training opportunities with our Kokujeitai counterparts, with our Korean counterparts, and anybody else we can find in theater that wants to practice and integrate and move data back and forth. So I would see this as exactly what it is a temporary issue while we modernize. You might know how old an F-15C is. Well, the originals came out in the early 70s, right? The good news is we have modernized since then. But I flew an F-15C in August when I was back at Kadena. And they all have 80s for the first digit of the year on the tail. Who here's got a car built in the 80s? I got one hand, but it's probably in the garage and never gets used, right? If you're going to create a credible deterrent, you have to modernize your force. We're going to get there, and what you're going to find at Kadena at the end is a more lethal, more ready force that will further the U.S.-Japan alliance and further the U.S. commitment to the Indo-Pacific. That's kind of what I got to say. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Our next submitter feels like there's a slight shift in thinking with Pacific Air Force leaders in regard to China and Taiwan, a mindset of it's not if China will invade Taiwan, it's when. If that's true, how does that thinking influence what you're doing in the Indo-Pacific now? If there is war in Taiwan, how will that change things immediately?
Interesting. All right. What was the first thing I said our task is here in the Indo-Pacific? To demonstrate a credible deterrence linked with allies and partners. That's our task. I have no idea what's in the Chinese Communist Party's calculus, but I know that every day we can demonstrate that we're more forward, more lethal, more often, but we're not alone. Think about the key allies and partners that are with us that bring extraordinary capability, extraordinary geography, create a conundrum for anybody that may choose to upend what arguably you could say over the last 80 years did what for the overall lifestyle of every Asian. Think about the economic growth in Asia over the last 80 years. It's profound. My most poignant example, and this may not be what this question's about, but as a young kid, okay, I was still this tall, but it was 1988, and I'm in Osan Air Base, Korea as a junior cadet at the United States Air Force Academy. Does anybody remember what Seoul looked like and what Highway 1 looked like between Seoul and Osan in 1988? I didn't go back to Korea until 2016. Seoul's an extraordinary city, just as an example, just an amazing metropolis, and my condolences go out to the Republic of Korea for the losses in Itaewon this past weekend for their citizens. But the power of a free and open Indo-Pacific transformed the Republic of Korea. Compare it to its counterpart. So when you ask me what's going to happen in the future, I don't know. If I'm the world and I'm looking at the power of economic growth and the power of freedom in the Indo-Pacific, to me the choice is clear. The choice is the status quo. And anything other than that, I think, is extraordinarily catastrophic for the globe. Nobody wants to be slinging fires in the East China Sea over anything because no one wins that game. I think you're silly to believe that there's a winner in that, even if you win. What wins is the current model that has raised hundreds of millions of Chinese out of poverty. Look at what it did across many of the nations in the Indo-Pacific. That's the business we're in as a nation. That's the business we're in as a coalition, is sustaining the status quo and retaining the freedom of choice for every nation in the Indo-Pacific and not being economically coerced, physically coerced, or politically coerced. You get to choose your way and your way forward. So I appreciate the question. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. You spoke of how the U.S. and allied effort to free the Solomon Islands during World War II. China now has security forces on the ground in the Solomons who have acquiesced under the weight of the free aid, such as telecommunications support provided there. You have touched on this some already, but can you expand on how this gray zone influence is being countered by the U.S. and allies in the Indo-Pac region?
Yeah, I would say it's more than, if you're relying on PACAF, you got the wrong perspective here. Does anybody know who Deputy Secretary of Defense Sherman is? How many times has she been into Oceania in the past 6 to 8 months? Anybody paying attention? The U.S. is doubling its efforts to demonstrate to Oceania and others that we are here and we mean business. So what does that mean? You're going to continue to see the agencies within an Indo-Pacific expand where they practice, with whom they practice. You know, if we look at exercises, right, what once used to be bilateral is now going to be trilateral. You'll probably see that in COPE India this year. What used to be multilateral is probably going to become more complex or more partners. And so what I would expect to see is greater efforts, greater opportunities for us to integrate with all those across Oceania and to continue to demonstrate the coalition's commitment to all nations in the Indo-Pacific, and to demonstrate to folks that there are choices in this world your country can make, and they have profound effects. And so I think our Department of State is leading the way, along with its allies in the region, to further its commitment to all those nations and to undermine some of the gray zone activities. So that's probably all I'm going to say on that one. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, sir. And the next question. For a small business that has data integration capabilities that address the mission need and has already been awarded an ABMS contract, but is having trouble getting an audience, how do you recommend that they engage?
Can you state, I guess it's right here, data integration. I guess the question would be an audience with whom? Did they say?
Yes, sir. Specifically noted Colonel Cloud.
So you might not know Colonel Cloud goes by Thunder's exact phone number, but he is here today. Thunder, can you raise your hand? We're in the business of listening, so if you're struggling to get in to see us, let's start with Colonel Cloud. He does a lot of work for us to assess some of the capabilities and capacities. But I would also challenge you to recognize the limitations of how the Air Force, we can advocate, but we don't possess an extraordinary acquisition budget like ACC does, right? Air Combat Command, for those not following along. They do a lot of the work for us on comm standpoint. So you may get started with us, but you might end up with 16th Air Force or Air Combat Command, because that's the way the Air Force organizes, like it or not. And so that's where the money is, and you typically want to go where the money is, right? So see Colonel Cloud, expect to have some engagement in San Antonio, Texas, and Langley, Virginia, to further advance some of the contacts that you have. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. What role does wireless play in your cybersecurity needs to reduce weight, increase agility with the warfighter, and reduce cost?
I don't know. I guess it depends, right? What are we talking about, right? Are we talking about, being at, I don't know, some island in the Indo-Pacific where I have a comm node that has multiple pathways to the outside world, and then I'm spreading data across a flight line? I would say there might be some wireless applications there, absolutely. I'm assuming that's what the question means by wireless, right? Which is more of a local way to move data. So I would say in that sense, even more in the CONUS, I would say that they're working hard on a wireless flight line, right? So let me give you an example where, in the past, this young man or woman would have a book about that big on how to fix an airplane. Now she has an iPad, but that iPad needs connectivity. And so trying to generate a 5G wireless environment within the base is where we are, I think, from a peacetime installation standpoint. When I look at it from a wartime standpoint, I think it gets to what I talked to you about, which is that might be the best way for me to have young men and women communicate at an island in the Indo-Pacific that's connected via multiple pathways, and I'm spreading that data across that deployed location. Is there anything you two want to add, Frank, or good? All right, I passed. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, sir. We have one more question from the audience. SATCOM reliance, especially for contingency or emergency deployment, appears an obvious risk. Is there benefit in seeking specific sovereign-owned global port access points that are sub-cable based?
I don't know what sovereign you mean, but some sovereigns are better than others. I'll start with that. But hey, so this gets back to my point of, and feel free to correct me to 100%, is cables matter in this business, but I don't know what happens to cables, right? Cables create great capacity. We love cables. We especially love them day to day. I don't know that we can rely on them in every day moving forward. So we're in the business of if we can expand the use of cables, great. If we can expand satellite footprints across the Indo-Pacific, awesome. If we can use proliferated LEO to great effect to combine all those three together to create a pathway that moves data like I talked about, that's what matters. So I would say maybe in general, yes, but clearly I think there's a specific question there that might be better served by talking to Frank or Thunder. So, but think about what I said in general in the environment we're trying to create. Thanks. Is that it?
Yes, sir. That was our final question.
Okay. Hey, so thanks. Thanks for the opportunity again. Thanks for bringing everybody together. Thanks for your contribution to try and sew this theater together. There's a former chief of staff of the United States Air Force that said, with every challenge, an opportunity. And so my personal view is this theater creates an opportunity for us to do things differently. And we talked about the small business partner there. And what I would offer maybe in closing is, does anybody know who General Schriever was? Got one hand up. How was he able to do what he did so quickly? Here's what I'd offer. He was given a task with direct authority to the number one person in the service with a budget and the ability to hire and fire and make decisions that allowed him to move quickly. That's what this theater requires. And so perhaps, our Department of Defense moving forward needs to look at if there's 2 or 3 key capabilities that we have to go. It ain't going to be solved in Jake's view, and I'm Jake for those who don't know, by some great joint command structure that allows us to stay within the normal culture and it doesn't get done fast enough. I think that the Schriever model might apply in some key capabilities that would have enormous impact in this theater. And the challenge for the nation, the Department of Defense and our industry partners is to figure out where those are and go about it differently. That's the task we're trying to set out. I think we have a great secretary right now who I think would be open to that. I haven't talked to him about it, but just think of the opportunity to take the Schriever model with a couple key capabilities on his list of operational imperatives and run as fast can be and not care which company it is, but which company can deliver quickly and deliver well and deliver capability in this theater rate that would make George Kenney happy. So with that, I thank you very much, and I'll see you around the block. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Yep, friendly, good.
All right, General Jacobson, on behalf of AFCEA International and AFCEA Hawaii, I want to thank you for taking time to take us down that little history lesson today of the Army being the grandparent.
Hey. Thanks, Dad.
The theater of innovation, 108 fifth-generation fighters, in this AOR. He said, if you got game, let us know, and you can practice that here in those ranges. He also talked about buying down the risk for his successor's successor and buying down the comm debt. And so, on behalf of AFCEA, sir, we're going to be providing a donation to the Friends of Windward Wounded Warriors. And on behalf of all the speakers this week, we're going to be presenting you a traditional challenge coin.
Thanks, Mike.
All right,
Appreciate it. Yep. All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And now we'll invite our young MC. Some of y'all will get that, young MC, back up here to talk to us about what else we've got going on today.
Thank you, General Jacobson. That was an outstanding presentation. Before we depart, I'd like to encourage you all to download the AFCEA TechNet Indo-Pacific app for listening to all our events over the next 3 days. At 1400 in the South Pacific Ballroom, please be sure to catch the U.S. Indo-PACOM J6 panel entitled Collaboration in Competition and Conflict. At 1545, we'll be presenting our Women in AFCEA panel titled Senior Cyber Leaders Discuss Risk Management, Challenges, and Opportunities in the top of Ballroom 2 and 3. There will be a Women in AFCEA reception following the panel, generously supported by Sienna and Increditech. All are encouraged to attend. Finally, if you're not already a member of AFCEA, please stop by our AFCEA membership booth located in the South Pacific exhibit floor. That concludes this lunch. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the conference.